I sat on the edge of the couch, the new apartment keys still warm in my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly as I tapped the remote. The screen blinked to life, revealing grainy but clear footage from the small security camera my boyfriend had insisted we install by the front door. I had only meant to test the system, to check the motion settings, to see how it worked. What I found instead made my breath catch in my throat. The first clip began with an empty hallway. Then the door opened. It was him. But he was not alone. A woman stepped inside behind him, laughing softly, too familiar with her surroundings, too comfortable. My stomach twisted. I leaned in, watching as he led her through what was supposed to be our place. They kissed like they had done it 1,000 times before. He whispered something in her ear, and she smiled as he pulled her into the bedroom, the one we had picked out together. I could not move. I could not speak. I felt the cold wave of betrayal wash over me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I could not believe what I saw, and I knew I could never move in. When I first met Ryan, it was not under extraordinary circumstances. We were in line at a local coffee shop, both irritated by the long wait, both glancing at our phones in mild frustration. He made a dry comment about how the espresso machine seemed to have given up on life, and I laughed, more than I expected to. That moment led to a casual conversation, and that conversation led to another the next day. Before I realized what was happening, we were seeing each other nearly every evening, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both new and strangely familiar. Ryan had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that made you feel safe without even trying. He listened intently, remembered small details, and made me feel like my thoughts mattered. We started dating seriously within a few weeks, and by the end of the year, I could not imagine life without him. We had shared holidays, met each other's families, and even talked about the future with a kind of certainty that made my heart race in the best way. The idea of moving in together came up naturally, like the next logical step rather than a risky leap. We started searching for a place during the early spring. At first, it was just for fun, visiting open houses, scrolling through listings, imagining where we would put our bookshelves or what color we would paint the bedroom. But it quickly became more serious. Ryan was the one who found the listing for the apartment we eventually chose. It was a quiet complex on a tree-lined street, not too far from the city but tucked away enough to feel like a retreat. The moment we stepped into the unit, I felt it. Something in the light coming through the windows, the layout of the kitchen, the way our voices echoed slightly in the empty rooms, it felt like it could be home. We signed the lease a week later. I remember the way Ryan looked at me after we handed over the deposit and got the keys. He smiled in that gentle way of his and said, "We are really doing this." I nodded, my heart full of excitement and nerves. We had already talked about how we would merge our furniture, which dishes we would keep, and what we would donate. I had even picked out a soft blue for the living room walls, something calming and clean. Ryan was more interested in gadgets and setup. He talked about smart lighting, a sleek entertainment center, and the best way to mount our TV. There was so much joy in the planning. We would stay up late on the phone browsing home decor websites, sending each other links to coffee tables and rugs. I loved how enthusiastic he was, how he made space for my preferences, and how he imagined our future as something we were building together. He talked about weekend brunches on the balcony, movie nights with wine and blankets, and even mentioned getting a dog someday, maybe a golden retriever. A few days before we were supposed to start moving our things, Ryan brought up the idea of installing a small security system. He said it would be simple, just a couple of cameras at the front door and one inside the main hallway. He mentioned recent break-ins in the neighborhood and said it was just a precaution. I did not think much of it at the time. It made sense. We were moving into a new place, and he wanted to feel secure. I appreciated that he was thinking ahead. He even said he would handle the installation himself to save us the hassle of hiring someone. The night before we got the keys, we had dinner together at our favorite Italian restaurant. We toasted to our new beginning, and he held my hand across the table, telling me how lucky he felt. I believed him. In that moment, I was completely in love, completely sure, completely unprepared for what was to come. When we stood in our empty apartment the next morning, holding hands and imagining where the couch would go, I felt like I was standing at the beginning of something beautiful. Ryan unpacked the small boxes that contained the camera system and began setting them up that afternoon. He explained how the app worked, showed me how to access the footage, and even joked that we could use it to spy on each other if we ever lost trust. I laughed, brushing it off as a silly comment. The thought of not trusting him never crossed my mind. Not then. Not when everything still felt so full of promise. The first time I noticed something that did not feel right was about a week before we officially began moving in. Ryan had been spending more time at the apartment, getting things ready, setting up furniture deliveries, testing the new internet connection. I was still staying at my old place for a few more days, finishing up the last of my packing. One evening, I called him to ask about the paint we had picked for the bedroom. He did not answer, which was unusual. We always kept in touch, especially while we were juggling the move. When he called me back 2 hours later, he said he had just fallen asleep on the couch after unpacking some boxes. I did not push it. His voice was calm, and he sounded tired, but something about the pause before he spoke made my stomach twist just slightly. I told myself I was imagining it. Moving was stressful. We were both tired. It was not unusual for people to miss a call. But little things started to add up. A few days later, I noticed that Ryan was stepping outside to take phone calls more often than he used to. Sometimes he would walk down the hall and close the door behind him. When I asked who it was, he would smile and say it was work stuff, something about a project he was managing. He had always been private about his job, which I had respected, but the shift was subtle enough to raise a question in my mind. One night, I arrived at the apartment earlier than expected. We were meeting to put together a new coffee table, and I had told him I would be there around 7. I ended up getting there closer to 6. As I walked up the steps, I thought I heard voices inside. When I knocked on the door, it took him longer than usual to answer. When he did, he looked surprised, just for a second, before smiling and pulling me in. The apartment was empty. I looked around without saying anything, trying to convince myself that I had just heard the television or maybe someone talking in the hallway. He acted normal that night, but I felt something shift in me. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I loved him. I trusted him. But that uneasy feeling had planted itself somewhere deep in my chest. Later that week, I stopped by to drop off some cleaning supplies. Ryan was not there, but he had given me a spare key. I let myself in and started organizing the kitchen drawers. While wiping down the cabinets, I noticed that one of the lower cupboard doors had a fresh scratch across it, deep enough to have chipped the wood. It looked new, like something heavy had been dragged against it. When I asked Ryan about it later, he said he had accidentally banged a toolbox against it while adjusting the shelves. I nodded, accepted his answer, and moved on. Another time, I noticed that a small decorative bowl we had bought together for the front entry table was missing. It was a little thing, something we had picked out at a flea market and laughed about because it looked like a giant walnut. I looked around for it, thinking maybe he had moved it. When I mentioned it, he said it had cracked, and he had thrown it out. His tone was casual, dismissive. But he had not mentioned it at the time, and he had not sent me a photo of it broken like he usually would have. I could not explain why that bothered me so much, but it did. At night, when I stayed over, I sometimes heard strange sounds, soft creaks or something shifting in the hallway when we were already in bed. Ryan always said it was just the building settling or the neighbors next door. It was an older complex, so that made sense, but once I woke up to what sounded like footsteps in the living room. When I got up and checked, nothing was there. Ryan was still asleep beside me. I told myself I was just on edge. I had been working long hours and moving was exhausting. We both laughed about the noises over breakfast the next morning. He joked that the place might be haunted, and I played along, pretending to shiver. But behind the smile, that tight knot in my chest was getting harder to ignore. I tried to push it down, telling myself that I was just overthinking everything. People miss calls. Things get broken. Noises happen in old buildings. I wanted to believe the man I loved had no reason to lie. I wanted the new life we were building to be exactly what it seemed, safe, shared, and honest. But that feeling of something being slightly off never quite left me. It followed me in small ways, in the way Ryan sometimes avoided direct eye contact when he answered questions, in how he suddenly became possessive of his phone, always placing it face down on the counter, never leaving it unattended. I began to wonder if I was becoming paranoid, if maybe I was imagining problems that were not there. I tried to focus on the good, on the dinners we cooked together in our half-furnished kitchen, on the laughter that still filled the space, on the plans we were still making. But deep down, something was starting to crack. The day had started with so much promise. I had finally taken the morning off work to move the first few boxes into what was supposed to be our new home. It was mostly little things, kitchenware, some picture frames, a few books. Ryan had told me he would not be home until later that evening because of a client meeting that might run long. I did not mind the quiet. I figured I would get a head start on unpacking, maybe even light a candle and make the place feel more like ours. The apartment was silent when I stepped inside. A few shafts of afternoon light streamed through the living room windows, landing on the couch we had picked out together. The walls were still mostly bare, but everything was coming together. I placed the boxes down gently, then stood for a moment in the middle of the room, listening to the quiet. It felt strange being there alone, knowing I would soon be sharing every inch of this space with someone else. But it also felt good. Like the beginning of something real. After putting away some of the kitchen items, I remembered the security cameras Ryan had installed the previous week. He had mentioned it almost offhandedly, saying it was a smart precaution to have a system in place. He had shown me how to use the app on my phone, but I had not really touched it since. I had not needed to. The thought of checking it now felt less like suspicion and more like curiosity. I wanted to see how it worked, maybe even laugh at how empty and quiet everything looked on the recordings. I sat on the edge of the couch and opened the app. The interface was simple enough. 4 camera views: living room, front door, hallway, and kitchen. The feeds were clear, each marked with a timestamp. I tapped the rewind icon, scrolling through the most recent few days. At first, everything looked exactly how I expected. Quiet. Still. Empty. A few shots of Ryan walking through the apartment, sometimes carrying groceries or a bag. He would glance at his phone, move into another room. Nothing unusual. But as I kept watching, something shifted. Late one night, just past midnight, I saw the front door open. Ryan stepped inside. Behind him, there was someone else. A woman. She followed him in without hesitation. She was dressed casually, as if this were not her first time. My fingers tightened around the edge of the phone. I leaned in closer. He did not look surprised to see her. In fact, he looked comfortable, familiar. He walked into the living room and turned on a lamp while she wandered into the kitchen like she had done it before. I froze. My thoughts tried to scramble for an explanation. Maybe it was a coworker, a friend in trouble, something innocent. But the footage continued. Ryan sat down, and she sat next to him. They talked. She laughed at something he said. Then he reached for her hand. I felt the blood drain from my face. The video played on. She leaned into him. He kissed her. Not a brief, casual kiss. It was intimate. My entire body tensed as I watched. They sat together for over an hour, touching, whispering. Eventually, he walked her to the front door. She left without looking back. I paused the video, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. I checked the date and time. It had been 3 nights ago. The same night he had told me he was too exhausted to talk, that he had gone straight to bed after work. My hands were trembling. I pressed play again, fast-forwarding through the following night. There she was again. entering after midnight. This time, they did not sit on the couch. They walked straight down the hall, into what was supposed to be our bedroom. The camera there did not have a direct view of the bed, but I could see the door close behind them. I could see the shadows move under the frame. I could feel my stomach twist as I imagined what was happening just beyond view. I had to pause the video again. My heart was pounding in my ears. The app's time display showed the footage had continued for over an hour before they emerged again. She left. He locked the door behind her, and then, this part hit me harder than I expected. He picked up my photo from the hallway table and placed it face down. It was not just betrayal. It was deliberate. He had wanted to hide my presence. He had made space for someone else in the home we were building together. I felt nauseous. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I sat there frozen, unable to move, unable to think clearly. My mind was racing with questions, with disbelief. But something in me needed to know how deep this went. I scrolled further back, digging through more footage. Days and nights blurred together. There were moments of him alone, but more than once I saw her, or someone else, coming in. Always late. Always when he thought I would not be around. One clip showed him opening one of my boxes, the ones I had marked as personal. He looked through a small journal I had packed, flipping through it, reading a few lines. Then he placed it back carelessly, not even bothering to close it properly. Another time, he pulled out a sweater of mine, one I had folded neatly, and held it to his face. I did not understand what I was seeing. It felt like my world was warping in front of me, bending into something I did not recognize. In another recording, I saw him moving things, items that had gone missing. The decorative bowl. A small framed photo of me and my sister. He placed them in a box I had never seen before and pushed it into the back of the hallway closet. I did not know what to make of it. Was he hiding my things? Erasing me slowly? The final blow came when I saw him standing in the living room, on a night I had thought he was working late. He was speaking on the phone. His voice was low, but the microphone caught a few clear words. She thinks this is ours. She has no idea. My breath caught in my throat. I could not move. I could not speak. I stared at the screen as the pieces all came together, a puzzle I never wanted to finish. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. I felt like I was sinking into the floor, the air too thick to breathe. I sat there, completely still, holding the phone like it might shatter if I moved. Everything I thought I knew had just collapsed around me. And I knew, in that moment, with perfect clarity, I could never move in. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the phone still in my hand, the screen now dark. My mind could not make sense of what I had just seen. Every memory I had shared with Ryan, every promise, every soft word, now felt poisoned. My stomach churned with a mix of rage, heartbreak, and deep, aching betrayal. I tried to breathe, but every breath felt too shallow. I felt like I was floating outside of my own body, watching someone else's nightmare unfold. Slowly, I opened the camera app again. I needed to be sure. I needed proof, not just for anyone else, but for myself. I saved the videos one by one, carefully downloading them and storing them in a private folder on my phone. Each file was a wound, another slice into the illusion I had believed for so long. The image of him holding another woman, the sound of his voice saying she had no idea, it played in my head like a sick melody I could not shut off. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the living room floor with my back against the couch, scrolling through every message he had ever sent me. I reread our texts, trying to find clues, lies, inconsistencies. I could not believe how easily he had masked the truth, how effortlessly he had looked me in the eyes and said he loved me while hiding this entire side of himself. By morning, my heart was no longer confused. It was hardened, steady. I could not walk away without saying something. I had to confront him. Not to save anything, but to make him look at what he had done. To force him to acknowledge the damage he caused. When I heard the front door open later that evening, I stood in the hallway, waiting. He walked in, smiling like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day had gone. I did not respond. I watched him set down his keys, shrug off his jacket, and turn to look at me. That was when he noticed my face. The smile faltered. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice full of innocent concern. I held up my phone without a word. I tapped the screen, pulled up the first video, and pressed play. I watched his face shift as the footage played. He took a small step back, then another. His eyes moved quickly from the screen to my face and back again. "Wait," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That is not what it looks like." I did not say anything. I just stared at him, waiting. The silence pressed down on us both. "I can explain," he said, lifting his hands. "It is not serious. She means nothing to me." "You brought her here," I said, my voice shaking. "You brought her into our apartment. Repeatedly. You told me you were working late, and you were here with her. You went through my things. You hid my belongings. You looked at my journal." He shook his head. "No, I did not. Okay, maybe I looked through a box, but I was just curious." "That does not mean anything." "You put my picture face down," I said. "You kissed her. You slept with her. You said I had no idea. That this place was not mine. How can you stand there and pretend like this is not exactly what it looks like?" He took a step forward. "Please, listen to me. It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I got scared. Things between us were moving fast, and I panicked." I laughed then, a bitter hollow sound that felt unfamiliar coming from my mouth. "So your solution was to lie? To cheat? To act like nothing was happening while I was picking out curtains and choosing paint colors? You did not just make a mistake. You built a lie. You looked me in the eyes and told me we had a future, while you were building a secret life behind my back. His expression twisted into something defensive. You are overreacting. It was not like that. You are making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. My breath caught. I felt heat rise in my chest. Do not do that. Do not stand there and tell me I am overreacting. I saw it. I heard you. Do not insult me by pretending I imagined it. I still love you, he said, his voice quieter now. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can get past it. No, I said, my voice steady now. You cannot fix this. You shattered it. You took what we had and destroyed it. There is no coming back from this. He looked desperate, reaching for me. Please. We were supposed to build a life together. Do not throw it all away. I stepped back. I am not the one who threw it away. You did that the moment you let her in. You did that when you chose to betray me, not once, but over and over. You do not get to ask me to stay after that. He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing me out of love, but the fear of losing control. Of facing the consequences of what he had done. I am leaving, I said. I do not care what excuse you try to give. I do not care if you cry or scream or beg. I am done. I walked past him, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. As I opened it, I turned back one last time. He was standing in the middle of the living room, still frozen, still not fully understanding that I was gone. That he had lost me. Without another word, I walked out. My legs were shaking, but I kept going. Down the stairs, out the building, into the night. The air felt cold and sharp against my skin, but it also felt like freedom. Like truth. I did not know where I would go next or how I would start over. But I knew I would never look back. Not at that apartment, not at that man, not at the life I had imagined with him. He had made his choice. And now I was making mine. When I finally closed the door behind me and left the apartment that had nearly become my future, the silence was deafening. I did not cry right away. I just stood there in the hallway, keys in hand, staring at the floor as if the answers would suddenly form at my feet. But all I felt was hollow, like every part of me had been wrung out and discarded. I walked outside and breathed in the cold air. It felt sharp and real, and for the first time in days, I felt awake. I went home to my old place. The one bedroom I had kept just in case the move did not work out. I had been hesitant to let it go entirely, and now I was grateful I had listened to that small, quiet part of myself that had whispered to hold on. I stepped inside, dropped my bag, and sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers trembled as I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. I had to tell someone. I could not keep this to myself. The first person I called was my best friend, Mia. Her voice came through the phone like a warm blanket. I told her everything, from the moment I had decided to check the cameras to the gut-wrenching footage I had watched alone in the dark. I told her how he had walked into that apartment with another woman, how comfortable and familiar they looked, how he had opened my boxes, touched my things, and erased any doubt I had left. Mia did not interrupt. She listened all the way through, and when I finished, she said, very simply, "Come over. Right now." So I did. At her place, she wrapped me in the kind of hug that held me together. I stayed the night, curled up on her couch, wrapped in an old quilt we used to share during college movie nights. In the morning, she made pancakes even though she hated cooking. She let me talk when I needed to and sat beside me in silence when I could not form words. The next few days felt surreal. I told my sister, my parents, a few close friends. Each time I said the words out loud, the reality set in a little deeper. I had almost tied my life to someone who had been living a lie. I had almost moved into that apartment thinking it was the start of a beautiful future, never knowing the foundation was already rotting beneath me. It was a strange thing to grieve something that had not even fully begun. I was mourning a version of my life that had never really existed. I felt like I had been sleepwalking, chasing a dream that someone else had scripted for me. And when I woke up, everything I believed had shattered. There were moments when I blamed myself. How had I not seen the signs? Why had I dismissed the late nights, the nervous glances, the vague explanations? Why had I laughed off the odd behavior instead of asking harder questions? My therapist would later tell me that it is natural to want to trust the people we love. That choosing to believe someone is not a weakness. That being lied to is not a reflection of your worth. I started therapy a week after I moved back in. I walked into the room feeling numb and brittle. But the woman sitting across from me did not ask me to be anything other than honest. She gave me space to speak, and when I faltered, she waited. Over time, I began to unravel the confusion, the guilt, the ache. I began to understand that healing was not a straight line. It was a spiral. Some days I felt fine. Other days, the smallest memory would knock the wind out of me. But each time I got back up, I was a little stronger. I also started to reclaim parts of myself I had set aside. I began journaling again, pouring my thoughts onto paper, sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes surprisingly hopeful. I signed up for a pottery class and found peace in the rhythm of shaping clay. I went for long walks in the park and let the quiet help me sort through the noise in my head. Eventually, I found a new place to live. It was smaller than the one we had picked together, but it felt right. There were no shared memories lingering in the walls, no tainted dreams hiding in the corners. It was mine entirely. I took my time decorating it. I bought furniture that felt soft and inviting, chose warm tones that made me feel grounded, and placed my favorite books on open shelves like old friends returning home. I also installed a new set of security cameras. Not because I was afraid, but because I had learned the importance of awareness. It was not paranoia. It was peace of mind. It was empowerment. In this new chapter, I began to truly rediscover who I was. I was not just the girl who had been betrayed. I was not just the almost fiancé who had seen something terrible on a screen. I was someone who had loved deeply, had trusted, had been hurt, and had found the courage to walk away when the truth became impossible to ignore. I learned to trust my instincts again. I stopped brushing off the little whispers of discomfort. I paid attention when something felt wrong, even if I could not immediately explain why. I learned to value my own voice above anyone else's reassurance. And slowly, that voice grew stronger. One afternoon, I sat on my new couch, watching sunlight pour through the window. My cat, who had returned to my side after the chaos, curled in my lap, purring softly. I felt calm. Not just the absence of stress, but the presence of something deeper. Clarity. Strength. Freedom. I scrolled through my camera app, just a quick check out of habit. Everything looked normal. Quiet. Safe. I smiled, remembering how different things had been not so long ago. Remembering how one click, one small decision, had pulled back the curtain on a truth I had been too afraid to see. And I thought about the path I had been on. The apartment I had almost moved into. The life I had almost built with someone who had no intention of honoring it. I had been standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into something that was never real. But I did not leap. I pressed play. I almost built a life with someone I did not truly know. Thank God I pressed play.